welcome back to Genesis Designs and Modelcraft, and welcome back to the Advent build. And this is episode 4. So I have tea again today, and it is Miles tea again, but it is not Earl Grey on this occasion. This is Smuggler's Gold, which is just basic English tea, I suppose. If you really wanted to categorise it, you'd call it like a breakfast tea, but essentially it's just tea. And Smuggler's Brew is again, as I said, it's Miles. Miles are based in Porlock, hence the Smuggler's moniker. And all of their teas are super nice, super good quality, very, very tasty. And not all that expensive in comparison to your sort of named brand supermarket teas, to be honest, but you do have to buy them online, so it makes sense to buy them in bulk, which then obviously makes it feel a little more expensive. Anyway, waffling, Smuggler's Brew, Smuggler's Gold even, probably, actually. So today's snack, the snack for episode 4, and this is one I wanted to feature last year, but I couldn't find any. Obviously, I'm getting old. I'm not all that old, I'm fairly old. Here we go. But it does seem more and more to be the case that things I fondly remember from my childhood either don't exist or are incredibly difficult to get hold of now. You know, Cadbury's chocolate is completely different than it ever used to be. I couldn't find Twiglets. Yeah. Anyway, these Danish butter cookies. These are wonderful. Copenhagen butter cookies. And these used to be... I mean, that was the only time we ever saw them, was at Christmas time, the big blue tins. This is a small blue tin. I remember the tins to be... much deeper, and indeed you can still get those. I actually ended up getting these from Amazon. Danish flag, it says so. But it seems you can still get them from Tesco, but I don't have a Tesco here, so I got them from Amazon, and this tin was $6.99. And what are they? Well, butter cookies. They are basically like essentially a Danish version of shortbread. And inside the lovely tin you get these equally lovely paper cases, same like muffin or cupcake cases, but with a stack of the various cookies in them. The bigger tins have 2 layers. And all of these are the same. It's possibly fairly visually obvious that they're the same biscuit, but they have they're different shapes. Some of them have crunchy sugar sprinkles and some do not. They look slightly different than I remember them. They look a little more coarse than I remember them from my childhood. But on the tin, somewhere, I've lost it, is the proud boast that these cookies sport 32% butter content. So you can imagine what they taste like. They're absolutely delicious. They're just a basic, to be honest, a basic shortbread style cookie. If I see, they're kind of crumbly. But they've got a wonderful soft, not as in non-chewy soft, but they're not grainy or gritty. And then they're sweet but not overly sweet, lightly sweet, as Steve the ration man would say. But then you just get this gorgeous salty buttery flavour coming in afterwards. So they are very similar to Scottish shortbread, the proper stuff, but a little bit softer, a little bit less firm. but very, very similar, and they are absolutely beautiful. A little bit of a vanilla taste in there as well. Oh yeah, so good. Well worth searching out if you like that sort of thing. And I really do. You know, if I was to set up a PO box and people just sent me various different sorts of shortbread and white chocolate Ferrero Rocher, I would be a very happy girl, and probably a fairly portly one quite quickly. Just spot on with a nice cup of tea. You do get slight differences in texture. These are a little crunchier because of the sugar on the top, and obviously a little bit sweeter. And some of them are slightly lighter. It's just the shapes and the way they're piped. But they are, across the board, absolutely beautiful, completely delicious. It's been years since I've had one. And it's an absolute pleasure to have one again. And I've got a whole tin to work my way through. Delicious. Okay then, so the model. I am ready, I think, to join the fuselage halves. So here are the instrument panels. You can see I've added the compasses. Word to the wise here, that isn't me, incidentally. The compass, the brackets for these compasses are notched in such a way that the compass housing is meant to fit in a particular alignment. I applied the decals randomly without taking that into account, and as a result my compasses don't line up with each other. It's not necessarily a problem per se. You could say one is caged and the other isn't or something, but just something to watch out for people who like things to be right. Here's a quick look at the seat belts without the rest of the fuselage around them, making them impossible to see. The shoulder straps are attached up here, and as such I can't really fit. Okay, you can't see what I'm looking at. They're attached in here. These slots in my Haynes manual are referred to as luggage compartments, but you could probably just about fit a homemade sandwich in there, but you know. But yeah, there's a cable that strings across and the shoulder straps attached to it, but I can't do that. I mean, I could, but then I'd have to thread them around the seat, so I'm going to fit them from the outside afterwards, which is going to be fun. So the instrument panels then are supposed to be fitted in these slots. I'm going to fit them from underneath after the fuselage is put together. I've done some I've tested that concept with a dry fit and it's going to work, so I'm going to put these out of the way. One of the big bonuses with doing that is that the debris and detritus from sanding this fuselage seam isn't going to attach itself to those instrument faces. Now I'm going to put this together with super glue, just as I always do. You know that I always use super glue for this kind of thing, and you know why. It's to avoid any problems with ghost seams later on down the line. And up to now I've always said to you glib things like quickly, accurately, confidently. That's our little mantra when we're using super glue to build things. And then I was watching Jamie Hago of Jamie Hago's Scale Modelling Cafe building something on YouTube, probably some sort of Spitfire, and he just used slow super glue, and it's sort of blindingly obvious to me now. It always was, I just hadn't really thought about it. But use slow super glue, you still need to be accurate, you still need to be confident, but the speed part is somewhat taken out of the equation. So at Telford I purchased some VMS. This is VMS slow CA cement. It says there, slow action. And I just got this out to use it, and I looked at my other super glues. I've got several different ones, and I recommend that people don't have several different super glues. They don't last forever, especially once you open them and start using them. They will go off in the bottle. So once you find a super glue that you like, stick with it and buy one bottle at a time. Anyway, long story short, I already had this black VMS, and I note that it says there slow action, so I think I already had some slow super glue actually, so I'm going to use the black one because it's an older container, and I'm going to, well, I haven't actually used it yet by the looks of it, but it's still an older container and it has been opened before, so I'm going to use one of these blisters from this EMK sets. I have a cocktail stick here. That is a very firm bottle, and I'm going to put, goodness gracious me, I'm going to put some super glue on there because I'm going to apply it to the model with the cocktail stick rather than straight out of the bottle. And if this is anything like AK, it strings and goes everywhere, but and makes a mess, but we shall see. Before I do that though, I need to grab the Mr. Colour thinners and just remove the paint where there is any from these joint faces. You do not want to be gluing your model together on top of paint like this, because if you do that, the bond that your super glue creates is only ever going to be as strong as the adhesion between the paint and the plastic. It cannot be any stronger than that. So make sure those surfaces are clean, and on top of that you can, if you wish, just give your seams, your joint faces, just a really quick arbitrary rub across with a sanding stick. Put some scratches in there basically, which can just give a little bit of a mechanical advantage to the glue. There we go, that's those cleaned off. Little scratch. Same here, you're going to work around the locating pins. Don't have to do it, but it will help a little bit. I have test fitted this thing together numerous times. It does fit beautifully. Doesn't need any titivation or prep really. But what I've just done there is not going to make it any worse. So now I need to apply the super glue to the entirety of this joining area. And because this is a slow acting glue, hopefully I'll have time to get around the whole joint fairly neatly. Because it's black, I can easily see where I've been. Just a nice layer of glue, doesn't need to be yards deep. Just a good coat across the whole thing. And no, I'm not fitting any rigging before I glue the fuselage together. I didn't think I would, to be honest, but I can't think of a good way of keeping the threads out of the way of everything whilst painting and everything else, so I'm just not going to do it. Okay, there we go. That is all still soaking wet, so that's worked out well. Now I have to introduce the halves to each other. I can eyeball the locating pin down the bottom there and just bring them in. And I've got some bits of tape here that I've been using to tape the thing together for test fit joyrides, and I'm going to tape it. And it will do that under the tape, but I'm not concerned. I will be sanding it off. Just to hold it all. See, I've got time because it's not gone off yet to make sure that's level before the glue goes off. Save myself introducing errors. Anywhere the joint where I've not got much glue squeeze out, I just add a little bit more on top, and I do that so that once I've sanded this thing down, it will already sort of be filled, basically. Shouldn't, with such a well-fitting kit as this is, shouldn't be any need to add extra filler after I've rubbed this down. Alright, and finally at the front here, I don't know if you could see there, you probably couldn't, but this has the ability to move from side to side. That's why I added the bulkhead at the front here, because it would have been very difficult to hold this in the right place without that bulkhead there. Very difficult indeed. And again, a good opportunity to introduce an error or a bad fit that would not otherwise be there. So that's it, it's all on. Nicely lined up, so I'll get my rocket. Deluxe Materials Rocket Blaster. I've used this for a lot of years now. It is expensive, but it does not attack the plastic, or never has yet anyway, and some super glue accelerators very much do. I will even use it on transparencies, and I'm still able to manipulate this joint better than I can manipulate my voice, apparently, to get it lined up. It's still being a bit tricky even with the bulkhead in, so I'm going to put glue on here just to help it hold itself in position a bit better, because it's hard for me to hold it with one hand. There we go, we've got it. So I've got a paintbrush that I don't care about, just a cheap gift set job. I tend to use micro brushes or paint brushes to apply the accelerator because it uses a lot less that way. They do come with a spray applicator, but here we go. You don't have to use accelerator. You can obviously just tape the thing together and wait. And if you feel inclined, I don't really need to, but you can add extra glue to the inside. I don't think it's necessary because with the bolt heads and the firewall in place, it is now quite sturdy. So take the tape off and start cleaning it up. And my sanding stick of choice, as ever, is the skinny sander. This is a Flory model, Phil Flory skinny sander. I've had my Flory skinny sanders for a long time, and much to my disappointment, frankly, Phil no longer makes these. So once they're gone, they're gone. I did see him at Telford, and I told him how disappointed I am about that, and urged him to put them back into production, but he doesn't seem keen. If anyone out there loves Phil Flory sanding sticks and would also like to see him put them back into production, just drop him an email and tell him I sent you, and he'll be very annoyed with me, no doubt, but if it encourages him to start making them again, then that would be a good thing. I'm putting very little pressure on this sanding stick. I'm letting it follow the contour of the kit. I don't want to sand a facet into this curved surface. But there you go, that is that bit done. Now I've got a bit of raised detail here, so I just use my scalpel to carefully sort of make sure that that step is still a step. I'll use the 15 to just nick that front edge. There we go. Lovely. Another Flory skinny sander, this being a sponge one. To knock back the scratches that I've made. That's that bit done. I'm not going to sand this bit yet because I got liquid glue all over it when I did this, so that plastic will be a little bit soft, so we'll go on to this section. I always start just by hitting that ridge of glue. Just to knock the worst of that height down with the slightly coarser side of the sanding stick. And then I'll switch to the smoother side, and in this case you're looking at maybe, that might be about a 180, and that's probably about a 320 on that side, but it's well worn, as you can see. Now I've got no need to worry about losing surface detail on this occasion, but despite that, the actual damage to the kit surface from doing this only extends maybe 5mm each side of the seam. Really is quite inconsequential, and because the seam was quite level in the first place, the depth of the sanding is such that had this kit had panel lines or rivets on it, I wouldn't have gone through them. They would still be there, and as long as they're still there, it's very, very easy just to re-deepen them if needs be. Moot, obviously, because this doesn't have any, but worthy of comment, I think. Anyway, there you go. That is 50% of the fuselage seam dealt with and done already. I'm going to carry on at my leisure off camera and do the rest, but you've seen it. That's how it is going to be done. And that's how the finished result looks. Well, I have all of the seams fully sanded down now. I did not have to add any extra glue than you saw me adding in the first place. You've already seen the top, here's the bottom. Now you can see a little bit of glue remains here, suggesting that there was a step, but you can also see, I think, just how thin that actually is. It's very, very minimal. And it's worth pointing out, as you can possibly see by the reflections, the undersurface here is not flat. It's tempting to think of this as being flat, but it isn't. I suspect it possibly is back here, but along this length it's not. I've sanded it to a simple shallow V. I looked around through photographs. I found a couple that showed two longerons, which would give a flat central portion and then beveled edges, but I also found photos with just one. So I'm happy to leave that as it is, as a V. So the next step is to add the insert to the upper rear fuselage. So there's an insert in the kit because of the fact that some Tigers have anti-spin strakes and some do not. By spin strakes, I'm talking about the there we go, this thing here. These were added to change the spinning characteristics of the aircraft. My aircraft does not have the spin strakes, it just has a nice smooth fuselage, so I'm using this insert and it fits pretty well, but there should be no seam here at all. And I have test fitted and I can still fit the tail plane after the fact, and it does fit just fine. I'm still adjusting to the new camera setup. I keep finding myself up here now instead of down here. So I'm going to fit this next. I will use exactly the same methodology as I used for this seam. Just the black super glue, and then I'll sand and blend it completely smooth. Alright, this bit is now attached, filled, sanded and smooth. The shape is all faired in. The fit of it is actually very good, and I think that the presence of, the fact that the super glue is black makes it look worse than it really is. But it's one of those where, because of the continuous curved shape, the way that's moulded, even a small difference along the joint can look quite big because of the angles. But yeah, it's creditable. So that's the main fuselage pretty much there. So before I fit the instrument panels and the lower wing, I just want to finalise kind of the construction really around the rest of the fuselage, just to avoid any possibility of myself contaminating the instrument panels and the cockpit area with debris from building. So of course, finalising the fuselage really at this point before paint, it's just the engine and the cowls. Now I've already glued the main top cowling with the nose cone. The nose cone was finessed this area of the intake here. Had the thickness of the cowl went that way, so it presented a massively thick lip at the front, which is obviously not correct. So that was trimmed back, all cleaned up, glued together, no issues there. And the two side panels I've not fitted yet. That's part of what's going to go on here with test fitting. This one I've already thinned the back. As you can see from the unmodified cowl, ICM have made an effort of mitigating the thick appearance at the back here, less so at the bottom. But what I've done, you can see the difference, and it's really not difficult to do this scalpel blade, and you can use the curved blade if you prefer gentle carving and scraping at a sort of a fairly acute angle, so that you're tapering the edge. This way you get a nice thin appearance right at the trailing edge without a stupidly weak part. So yes, I need to do that with this one too, but I want to do test fitting to make sure everything's lined up properly, and really to do that I need the engine in. And here is said engine. The main bulk of it is just the two parts which have been glued together. I've addressed the joint minimally, essentially only this part here. Clearly I'm not going for an open cowling, I care not, so none of the rest of it really needs to be cleaned up, but this bit is quite visible. And there's a bit of a strange thing here. I don't really know what ICM had in their breakfast cereal the day they designed this engine, but the cylinders, or more precisely the sort of the finning, is moulded as being square. Now this was not a little known square piston variant of the Gypsy Major engine. The pistons were round, and I know that cylinder fins don't need to be round just because the cylinder is, but in this case they actually were. So what I've done is I've again used the scalpel, and I've carefully carved down the corners of the front one. I'm not bothered about the rest. The front one, I've carved it down for a more rounded appearance, and I need to now get my scriber and essentially just try and put some lines back in it to give a suggestion of the fins. And I don't do this by the normal sort of scribing method. I locate my tool in what's left of the lines around the centre of the part here, and I'm just pressing. I am travelling the tool along, but the cutting edge isn't engaged, it's just all on this bottom edge. Move the tool along, pressing down the whole time. You need to use a bit of pressure to induce a groove, which I've now managed to do. Doing stuff like this on camera is frankly terrifying. There we go. Utilise much holding of breath and other things of that nature to allow yourself to concentrate. Then I'm going to use a razor saw blade. This is, you've seen it many times before, this is my razor saw. This is a JLC. Don't know if these are still available or not. They're quite expensive, or used to be. But rather than using it within the holder, which makes it fairly unwieldy, I'm going to use it freehand to very carefully embiggen this scribed line a little bit. I do have some photo etched razor saws of varying shapes. I think they might have been a Hasegawa set from years ago, but I'm not fully set up and unpacked at this point. Probably won't be for some months, and I don't actually know where they are right now. They would be slightly easier because the teeth on them are a little bit finer. But just be careful, be gentle, be patient. work your way around, just deepen the line you already started with the scriber, just to encourage it to look like a cooling fin rather than a scribed line. Okay, one down. Nerve-wracking. There we go. A little bit of extra thin just to soften everything up, and I think that looks okay. And I need to continue that all the way down that fin. It still isn't going to be correct. It should have 2 cylinder studs are quite visible, but with this block being attached, it's going to be very, very difficult for me to replicate that. It wouldn't be very difficult to remove the cylinders from the block, sort it out and then glue it back on, but I can't really afford the time. I had a bit of a wake-up call when I woke up this morning, that it's the 12th of December already, and at this point I have 12 days to finish this model. A light panic ensued, so yeah, I just need to stop dragging my heels and get on with it, really. And that is a thing in modelling. You can sort of side quests can really slow things up if you're not careful, and focus in the mental context of the word rather than the visual one can be one of the biggest challenges with getting models finished in a timely fashion. These fins are all going to be quite far apart and quite big and chunky, but you know, it's going to give the general impression. If you don't want to do this, clearly don't. The engine isn't, it is very much visible in that cowl intake. If I put it into position, you can see it here quite easily. But the engine is also very much painted black. It's black. It's not silver, it's not bright, it's black. So it's not like this is going to be an intense visual focal point that's going to overtake and destroy the viewing pleasure of your tiger moth. It won't. It's something you're only really going to see if you look a little more closely. So it, you know, it's an investment in time and effort for relatively minimal gain, if I'm absolutely brutally honest. But there are ways out. There is an aftermarket engine available. A modeller who goes by the name of Mr. Plamo has designed and is producing a 3D printed resin engine for this kit, which is very, very nice. And it corrects this, the square piston variant back to around a circular piston, and adds a lot of other detail as well. The Gypsy Major is not a complicated engine. It's a 4-cylinder petrol engine, around about a 6 litre displacement, and a mighty 120 horsepower. Not much power at all. Less than the majority of standard family cars on the road these days. And it's not complicated at all. A single carburettor on the right hand side. A couple of magnetos at the back. And that's pretty much it. There's not much going on with it. However, the 3D printed resin engine does include a lot more in the way of the linkages and bits and pieces than the kit engine does, and looks a bit busier. I'm not 100% sure on the price. I did look it up, but I have forgotten. But you can find Mr. Plamo on Instagram, and his 3D printed resin parts have been shown on the Interesting Modelling Company have linked it, and Aeroscale have as well. If I remember, I'll put a link down below, but as you know, the majority of the time when I say that, I do not remember to actually do it. especially with a release schedule like I've got at the minute. So yeah, look up Mr. Plamo for your 3D printed engine if you want one. The other parts then, you've got the bearers here. This is the intake manifold piece with the carburettor. That square section there is the carb. The intake manifold is a very square structure on the real thing. Here we have the push rods. These fit on the side like so. Then you've got the there's a duct. Trying out to searching around for the right sort of word there. It's a duct which is metal, is permanently fitted, goes on the side here, and this channels the airflow from that forward air intake in such a way that it has to cool the cylinders to improve the efficiency of the cooling. It is air cooled. And the exhaust piece. I have already drilled this out. There was a sort of an indented end on the kit part. I simply introduced that indent to a 1mm drill bit, drilled it down some, and then used the technique of waggling the drill with the drill bit around a little bit, just to bring the hole more up to the size of the part. And it also allows you compensate for the fact that the actual kit part isn't what you'd call round, so you can just gently sort of you could also, if you didn't want to use the drill bit like that, you could use the scalpel blade for the same purpose, but with it being a 1mm bit it's a lot sturdier. And the final part then is the oil tank. Here we go, very prominent on these aircraft, sits on the side. I'm going to include a little masking tape spacer underneath that because it is a little bit below the surface of the fabric covering. If you look, I don't want that. I want it, if anything, to be very slightly proud, and the way to do that is you can use shims, but there's such a small difference on this occasion the plastic hold would be a bit much. You can use masking tape, just put strips in, and another thing you can do, which is super simple but you won't get your blue tack back obviously, put a bit of blue tack in the back of your part, trying to do it too quickly and making it look difficult, it's not. Little piece of blue tack in the back of the part, and then when you put the part on, it's obviously going to sit all kinds of proud, but you can use the blue tack to press against, and it allows you to set where you want your part to sit. I've got a bit too much blue tack in here, so it's offering a lot of resistance. There we go. That was a very worrying sounding crack there. Doesn't look like I've opened up the joint, but there. That's allowed me to set that tank in that slightly more proud position, and I can just put glue around the part as normal, and it's going to hold itself up out of that slot a little bit because the blue tack's in there, we're acting as a spacer. Very quick, easy way to deal with any insert really. If it doesn't sit exactly where you want it to, particularly when it's too low, a little bit of blue tack, masking tape, shims, all works a treat. Right, I'm going to carry on and get this engine put together, and then I'll come back and we'll fiddle it into place and see how the cowlings fit. Okay, here we are with the engine in situ, nice and easy. So I did thin out the front edge of this duct as well, but in truth it's minimally visible really through the front of the thing. Just basic, very basic, some colour in there so that if you can kind of peep in around the edge of any of the cowls, you're not seeing bare plastic. That's it, that's all it's there for. It's LP5 black and it's my own interior green, and then that will allow me, or does allow me, to actually just fit the cowls in place. So I'm going to glue this main section on first, and I'm just going to have to trust the kit, to be honest, but it does look, from all the test fitting I've done, and as you can probably tell, it's a bit awkward to hold it in position, but as best as I can tell from test fitting, to speak properly, it does seem to work. So I'm going to throw caution to the wind and not put that much glue on it, so not quite all the way in the wind, and just commit to glue. And my glue lid blue tack keeps on falling out. I think it's lost its stick, but I've had a mysterious complete loss of all blue tack. I don't know where it's all gone. I'm going to have to buy some more. I don't use it all that often anymore. It used to be a bit of a modelling staple, but it isn't so much anymore. But that said, it's one of those things, you know, it's like a chainsaw. You don't need it very often, but when you do need it, there really isn't anything else that will do the job. Chainsaw analogy might be stretching it a bit, sorry. Oil tanks then, I did use some of my rapidly dwindling blue tack stash in there. Alright, now before this has gone off, I'm still able to move this a little bit. I can make sure that side panel is going to play ball, and it appears that it is. So I'll just deburr it a tad, because I can see a sort of slight fuzziness about the gap in the join. This is something that I actually really enjoyed doing it for some reason, but it's one of those things that I really do spend a bit of time with. Is this, I'm calling it deburring. That is technically an incorrect term, but the majority of injection moulded plastic parts do have a kind of an edge on them. In most cases with modern toolings, presumably with older ones as well, frankly, the mould seam is arranged so that it runs along one of the corners, or all of the corners of the part. So in most cases with modern kits, there's just a very slight little bit of not quite straight, nice neatness on the edges of parts. And this little process of gently scraping it with the scalpel blade, as you just saw me doing, just tend to neaten them up really nicely, and it indeed has. There you go, that's one. That fits very nicely. So I've got to try and get rid of that non-sticky blue tack, get some glue into there without messing everything up. This top joint is a piano hinge, so it does need to be parallel and doesn't really need to have a big gap in it. The front one, you can get away with it being a bit gappy and uneven if it needs to be. It's not too bad. It's my thin down trailing edge there, looking very much the part. Now the cowlings on these things are aluminium, sheet aluminium, quite lightweight, thin, flexible, not particularly strong. So gaps and bends and things are the norm. Looks like I've already cleaned that one up. Lovely. I did do a lot of test fitting, but that is not to say that it needed any help. This has dropped together, in all honesty. we go. I'll add the lower part once the wing is on. I also did thin the back edge of this cowling panel. But there we go. That's my front end on, and we're looking very tiger mothish now, aren't we? So I need to add the instrument panels so that I can add the wing. If I forget the instrument panels, I'm going to be very, very grumpy with myself. So there's no way that I'll get them in there after the fact. Absolutely none at all. I wonder how much swearing I'm going to have to use at this point. Let's find out. Now these CMK instrument panels are different shapes. Each one of them is slightly different than the other, and there is no mention in the instructions for them which is to be treated as the front, if any. I don't believe, frankly, that they are handed, as it were. I've just got to do my best to get that in level. Yeah, that will do. You can see there that I have not painted the underneath of the compass bracket. Don't tell anyone, okay? Ooh. Goodness gracious, my super glue is a tiny bit not quite blocked, but a bit blocked, and I've just put half a litre of it on, on my dish at the side here. The dish, incidentally, is attached to the bench, and it is just one of these blister packs, repurposed as a disposable super glue dish. Once it gets crusted up and disgusting, I'll just get rid of it. Okay, now cocktail stick, bit of super glue, and just pop that into the back there. The super glue at the moment that I'm using is the AK Magnet Ultra Resistant. Standard density, but it's not very thick. It's not like a super thin glue at all, but it's thin enough that the caterpillar action works very nicely. There we go, that's one dashboard in. Go, get it parallel. There we go. Our plastic pilots can now see which direction they're going and how fast they're getting there. So the next step is to introduce the lower wing into the proceedings. It's very important to blow your parts frequently. And then we have an almost complete interior. It actually does look quite nice in there. I suspect it's really not very visible for you on the camera there. And I am going to fit this with super glue. Mostly, to be honest, for speed. It does look to me like the right wing wants to sit up a touch, but I don't think there's really a lot I can do about it. Right, deep breath. fuselage side has a lovely chamfered edge here, and the wing has a matching chamfer, or should I call it a bezel, whichever you prefer, but it's angled. So that when you bring the two parts together, it sort of auto aligns and brings itself into that nice corner joint that you might just be able to see under my finger there. It's very reasonable. You shouldn't need too much cleaning up. That's it, the wing's on. Excellent stuff. All of a sudden I feel like I'm not quite so far behind everyone else. Right. Lovely bit of detail on the belly there. Okay. Well, apart from a bit of masking, and the last bit I wanted to put on here before starting to put a bit of painting was this lower piece of the cowling. I have put a little bit of Vallejo perfect plastic putty, whatever it's called. It's not called that, is it? That's the deluxe materials one. It's just plastic, Vallejo plastic putty. Shown you it enough times, but I can see that I haven't quite done a good enough job here, so I'm going to top it up. So you just this is a very acrylic putty, very water based. Just splodge a bit where it needs it, and then get a damp cotton bud. I really literally just wipe off the excess, and a little bit will sit into that seam or gap. It's no good for large gaps or structural purposes, and you can't really sand it down no matter what it might sound the tube, but for that kind of thing it's absolutely ideal. There is a transition here, there's a shape in the fuselage to allow for it, but this area is plywood, this is wood, and this is fabric covered, so that's why you can get away with doing that. I have also cleaned up the joint we did earlier. I've really just trimmed and scraped it slightly to get it flush, or very nearly so, across its length, but it isn't perfect, but it's certainly good enough. Anyway, the last part, when I was offering it up, I couldn't get it to sit where I wanted it to and fit at the same time. There's a little notch at the back here that it goes into, and obviously it sits at the front, so I trimmed the front cowls until they met and were nice and level to allow that to sit smoothly. And once I had that, I found that I had a tapered gap that was reasonable and, you know, okay at the front but quite large at the back. You can get away with this not fitting perfectly, but it needs to fit a bit. So I've done the same thing as I described with the upper wing. I've applied a piece of, it's actually two pieces of plastic card to the edge, and this I've allowed that to dry a little bit, and then I've trimmed it roughly to size with nippers. Now I'm going to sand it to a taper to take up this gap, or make the gap parallel at least. So at the front here I virtually don't need, let me just remove that from the dust zone, I virtually don't need anything there, but I wanted it to taper out smoothly and not end up with a sort of a slot effect. So I took the piece of plastic card, it's longer than it needs to be essentially, and what I'm doing is I'm loading this end of the sanding stick, so I'm not really sanding this end of the wedge or the shim. You can see I have achieved a taper. isn't necessarily the correct taper, but we'll find out in a minute. And I basically need to keep going until I've blended this front edge in completely, and I'll start offering it up. That's pretty much it. Straight away. I've not even done anything else, and that's already in a place where I would say it's acceptable. So what I'll do now is sand it and trim it. Well, I'll trim it first because there's a fair bit of overhang. You can quite clearly see that overhang. Trim that to flush or nearly flush with the kit part itself. It's as well to go at this gingerly. Try not to, as in don't try and cut through the whole thing in one go, because it would be very, very easy to essentially snap the plastic card back off the part. It's got quite a small gluing surface. So get it close and then use the sanding stick to finalise that edge. When I'm scrutinising it like I am now, what I'm looking for is a shine. I'll try and point it out, but towards the back of this part, if you look right at the back here, I don't know, hopefully you might be able to see there's a little sort of a bit of shininess, and that shininess is where the glue is on the kit part, and that's showing you that it isn't sanded across the two parts, and therefore it's not actually fully level yet. I don't know if that was visible or not, really sorry if it wasn't, but hopefully the explanation will suffice. If not, essentially if you can see any shine along that join, then there's still either a step or a sort of a slight dip between the parts, which we don't want. Sponge. I did use the sponge already to go around the nose. The front of this, there was a very slight step on the edge of the part, and I trimmed off, there was a ledge on the inside here to line the parts up, but the ledge was actually too close to the edge of the part to allow it to fit with this, so it wasn't going to fit there, so I just trimmed the ledge off. Mechanical interlocks really aren't needed when you're using glue after all. Okay, that looks better. Let's see how it fits now. To say, I'm not actually bothered if there's a gap, I just didn't want a huge gap. That's so difficult. There we go. Oh, that's much better. There. Doesn't quite meet, it doesn't need to though, because in reality this side panel is fastened to the structure, it's not fastened to this. So if there is a gap there, it doesn't matter. If you look at pictures of the real ones, there very often is a really quite advanced gap along there. But I'm quite happy with that. With a little bit of glue, that's absolutely spot on. All the way around. I'm going to have to glue it on. And I did forget to mention the paint I've used here on the exhaust. This is Mr. Metal Colour Stainless. So that's MC213, and I've applied that with a paintbrush. And that is all that is, nothing else. And I can and will apply a dark brown wash or a black wash at some point, which will just dull that finish down to look slightly more like an in-service exhaust than a brand new one. So there we go, that's that done. I shall glue that on. and mask the cockpit apertures and what have you, and we'll pretty much be ready to add paint. I could add the tail feathers before paint, but I think I'm not going to. That is a really nice join on the tail plane, and the rudder, there is a gap, but there's supposed to be. There you go. It just saves a load of effort with masking, but what I will do is reattach the rudder to the fin, and I'll use some more of this plastic card. This is a bit that I've trimmed off that cowl. I'll make a couple of little blocks to fit in there to masquerade as hinges. I'll glue that back together because it's just a bit easier to paint it as one part than it would be if it were two. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it there for this episode. I am just still, you know, messing around with final little bits and bobs, trying to figure out what I really need to do before I can start painting this area. I'm going to test fit the windscreens, but I won't be fitting them before paint. I just need to test fit them to make sure they do fit. And there's a few other bits and pieces, just finalising things. I have glued together and test fitted the blind flying hood because my aircraft, the photo I'm using, does have one fitted. I've reattached the rudder to the fin. You can see the little plasticard blocks. It's not a truly accurate rendition of the hinge, but it would do. There's a very slight offset to the rudder there, so that's fitted back together. Obviously not the strongest joint, so I need to be quite careful with that. And I've just been looking around the model and making sure I'm happy with all the seams, which I am. I'm very happy with the effect I've got from thinning down these cowl parts and doing the exhaust and all the rest of it. It's looking really nice. And you can see that I'm using the model stem that Fuzzy's Ghost Models sent me. It's funny really because it's been sat at the side of the bench since I set the bench up, and I was casting around for some way to put the model down because the exhaust sticks out and it becomes the thing it sits on, and I was just reaching for some paint pots to lay the model down on, and realised that I've got this tool that's actually created for the purpose of setting the model on, so here we go, I'm using it. I have fitted the slats to the upper wing, no modification, they fitted into place rather beautifully. And really one thing that I haven't mentioned that I do need to do is make some navigation lights. So I know I said in one of the other episodes that these aircraft don't even have them, but the aircraft I'm modelling does. So I need to make one that fits into the rudder and one for each top wing, and I'm going to use this piece of rod. It looks to be about a 2mm plastic rod, and just carve it to shape and then fit it in. It might not be precisely the correct size, but it's a representation only, so I need to do that as well, and I'll show the results of that next time. So I am going to wrap it up there. It will probably be slightly longer before the next actual episode. I've got various things coming up, work and what have you, and being honest, I need to get my head down and get some modelling, more modelling than filming done, because I'm slightly concerned that I'm going to struggle to make the deadline on this. Sharp intake of breath. Regardless, however, I will be back within a few days, and with episode 5 and yet another snack, and I've got a contentious one for the next episode. So I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much for watching, and special thanks as always to all of my YouTube channel members and my supporters and members on buymeacoffee.com. And with all of that said, it only remains for me to say until next time, look after yourselves, look after each other, and Genesis out.